Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunella Rosa. This week, we're discussing how populist leaders continue to attract votes around the globe. 2024 is going to be the largest election year in human history, with 4 billion people going to the polls. Brunello, what are some of the big elections?
So we have discussed this a few times already, and we actually started publishing on this in July, August, way ahead of everybody else, because we consider next year there will be elections in key developed markets and key emerging markets. In the end, of course, we got the UK, we got the US, we got the European Union. In emerging markets, we got, first of all, elections in Taiwan in January, and then Russia, and then again India. So as you said, around 4 billion people going to the polls. And whatever the polls will show will most likely change the fate of the world, we believe.
Yeah. There's a key election in Argentina recently where Javier El Loco Milei has been elected president. Tell me more about the impact of this, but also one of among many sort of controversial proposals to abolish the Argentine central bank.
Yeah, so Javier Milei has been elected president actually with a large margin compared to Massa, the Peronist alternative candidate. Clearly, the Argentinians are tired of, in concluding, politicians and actually those who make damage to the economy with that has now reached 140% of inflation, which clearly is unbearable for anyone. So they want some new economic recipes, if you want. They want new solutions. And they believe that they have found these new solutions in Javier Milei, who's a very controversial figure. He has the founder of a new movement called La Libertad Avanza, which is like freedom gets on or carries on or advances, the various translation you can imagine. And it's kind of a libertarian movement in many respects, although they're also anti-abortion, which is kind of a bit of a contradiction. But as part of this liberal, libertarian agenda, they also have this idea of abolishing the Argentinian central bank, and with it, the peso that they issue, and dollarize the economy completely, which means that adopting the dollar as the official currency. That goes beyond the adoption of a currency board that they've already adopted around 30 years ago with pretty bad results anyway. That didn't prevent inflation from rising, didn't prevent the depreciation of the peso, didn't prevent several defaults from occurring. So effectively, this will be the extreme version of a currency board. Now, why we believe that this is something that doesn't make sense. First of all, people may criticize the decisions that the central bank has made, and rightly so, to some extent. However, at least public opinion and politicians may have a say, or at least can do something about what the Argentina central bank decides to do. Once you abolish the Argentina central bank and you adopt the dollar, first of all, this currency doesn't fall from the sky like rain. It is printed, and it's printed by another central bank. And is a central bank, the Federal Reserve, on which there's no whatsoever control and is not at all accountable for what they do, because the US central bank does monetary policy for the US, not for the Argentinian people. So it makes no sense to surrender monetary sovereignty to a country that doesn't want it and is not going to act in your interest. And then also because even if, for any reason, that project were to become somehow acceptable, and we don't think it's the case, but let's assume it becomes, then would it be feasible? And we don't think it would be feasible because there are examples of dollarized economies such as Ecuador or euroized economies such as Montenegro that accept the currency of another country or region. But these are very small countries at the doorstep of large continental economies from which they almost fully depend, which means that whatever happens to this large continental economy is then going to affect the small economies at the doorstep. So it cannot make sense to mirror or even adopt their currency. But Argentina, this is not the case. It's not at the doorstep. Is of course several thousand miles away. Is not a small country. It's actually the second largest in Latin America. It's very populous, 40 plus million people, and he is a large economy. It's not a small economy in any by whatever count. So effectively, you would have the necessity to print dollars for all these people, and the Fed will never do that. And the reason why they're never going to do it, because it's not their job to print dollars for the Argentinians. Yeah. So effectively, we believe this idea makes absolutely no sense, and even if it made, is unfeasible.
Yeah. And then looking elsewhere, another populist victory in Europe that sort of rocked headlines last week, with the Netherlands electing Geert Wilders, the nationalist and populist leader, who collected 23.6% of the votes. I mean, how did this happen, and what might be some of the consequences of this?
Yeah, so Geert Wilders have been trying to gather more and more votes for the last few years, since he emerged as effectively the successor of Pim Fortuyn, an extremist populist leader that was killed years ago. And he has adopted some of these ideas, including being not just anti-migration, but anti-Islam and so on and so forth. Now, again, Dutch people might have been tired of traditional parties who always need to find very difficult compromises in parliament just to reach anything done. Plus, this comes after a long period of let's call it domination by Mark Rutte as prime minister for so many years. And so time for change to some extent. Now, 24% is a very high number, but is way far from anything that resembles a majority. So if Geert Wilders wants to go to government, he will need to form coalitions. Or all the other parties, or at least the 2 or 3 major parties, the Social Democrats, the moderate conservatives, the Greens, and so on, coalesce to form a coalition and a government and exclude Geert Wilders. What's the best option? In the short run, it might be better to keep him out of power. In the longer run, it might be better to have him in power, so that as it almost always happens, once you've tried populist in government, you realize that they cannot solve the problem exactly as the politicians, the traditional politicians can't, simply because problems are complex. It cannot be resolved with a slogan. And therefore, eventually, this is how the disappearance of populist party begins.
And that's when we haven't even mentioned really perhaps the biggest populist threat of all, Donald Trump's potential election victory in the American presidential elections next year. And kind of looking at current polls, not only is that a real possibility, but actually the polls favor him as the elected successor to Biden. So really much to think about and much to watch in the very interesting year to come. But as always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.